It was the middle of the afternoon, a working day, in the middle of Australia's largest city. An 18-year-old girl has just been for a job interview. She gets off the suburban train with some Lebanese-Australian men whom she has just met. And so begins a horror journey into night. It only ends when she has been sexually assaulted by 14 men and raped 25 times. What Amanda doesn't know during her night of terror is that she is just the latest in a series of gang rapes with ugly racial overtones.
I just can't believe they had no pity whatsoever. They didn't think of me as a person, they thought of me as something. It's just rubbish or meat or something. I was so angry that they had done that to me, and I didn't want them to get away with it, not at all.
It's 2 years, almost to the day, since Amanda's nightmare happened.
It was approximately 3:30 in the afternoon, so it was broad daylight. And I'd never heard of a gang rape before it happened to me. I thought I was safe here. I don't feel safe anymore.
Bankstown is the typical Aussie melting pot, with a bit of Asia and the Middle East thrown into the suburban mix. Amanda leaves the train that afternoon, as these security cameras record, with the young Lebanese-Australian men whom she's just met. Amanda thinks that they're going to smoke a marijuana cigarette in the car park toilet nearby. Instead, the first of 25 rapes happens here.
I was scared that if I angered these people or annoyed these people, they were going to hurt me. And I didn't want to be hurt.
When did you fear for your life? Did you think they'd kill you?
Yes, there was a point where one of them held a gun to my head, and that's when I had to ask myself whether or not it was worth fighting and dying, or just letting them do what they... not letting them, but not fighting, not putting up too much of a protest and living that night.
Did you actually reach that decision, Amanda? Did you
Yeah.
actually decide that you're going to have to submit?
I knew that I had to live. I couldn't stand the thought of my mum and everyone I love and know not knowing what happened to me if I turned up dead that night. I knew that I had to live.
Now, you didn't actually see the gun, you just felt a barrel at your head.
I felt the cold metal on my forehead.
And did they threaten you?
Yes, they did. The person said, "Don't move or you're dead."
Don't move or you're dead.
Yeah. Or you're a dead bitch.
Yeah.
There was a bitch in there somewhere.
Looking at her today, it's hard to believe what Amanda's been through. She was first raped by 5 men in the Bankstown toilet, and over the next few hours, she suffered every kind of sexual abuse and humiliation.
What a good boy.
The judge, the Crown Prosecutor, the police, the Premier of New South Wales, Bob Carr, all call you courageous, brave. Do you feel brave?
I didn't feel brave. I just felt like I did what I had to do to lock them away, make them stop.
How do you feel when a learned barrister in a wig and vest and so on calls you a liar?
It was so offensive. It's just horrible to have people doubting you, what you're saying and what you had to experience. And
Did you know, were you told that you shouldn't get angry, you shouldn't get emotional?
Well, if I'd gotten all emotional and angry and upset, I don't think I would have been able to do it.
Was it agony to have to go through second by second
Yeah.
what these fellas had done to you?
It was so hard because, I mean, you have them in the room with you as well. So you have to tell a whole room full of people what they did in front of them, and then they're still treating it like it's a joke.
Did they really?
Yes.
In what way?
Sniggering. There were times where I'd have to take the stand before the jury or the judge would enter the room, and they'd be laughing and elbowing each other and quoting my evidence that I'd just given to the court before the break. It was so hard, but just had to remember that I'm above that. You know, like that it can't hurt me anymore. They've done their worst to me. There's nothing more they can do.
As you started to read this young woman's account of this horrendous crime, you could think to yourself, oh, this is just awful, this is amazing. I've in my whole time, 22 years in the service, I'd never read anything like it. I think she as a very young woman, was incredibly brave and incredibly intelligent with the way she dealt with the situation.
Detective Inspector Kim McKay calls herself a cynical old cop. She was in charge of the gang rape investigations.
Hi Amanda, how are you? Good.
Codenamed Seda, their job, working with victims like Amanda, was to find and arrest these gangs of serial rapists.
When I first came on the strike force, Michael Porter handed me the Amanda's statement. And I couldn't believe what I was reading. Every time I turned a page, I kept saying to myself, well, when's this going to end for this girl? I said, is this fair dinkum? I don't think I'll ever, hopefully never, investigate another matter like this.
20 years a cop, Mark Hannigan was one of the police team who became like family to Amanda.
This investigation affected us all in a lot of ways. We were very emotional about it. It was an emotional case. This is a little bit more isolated here.
From the Bankstown toilets in the dark at about 5:30 p.m, Amanda is taken to the car park of the local trotting club. The rapists use their mobile phones to round up mates, saying, "Come on down, we've got a slut at the trots."
So where was it?
Right here. Sometime after the assaults, we actually found quite a few exhibits here.
What do you mean, condoms?
Condoms, DNA evidence. The assaults occurred roughly in this area. Shortly after that, another car rolled up.
By the time she got here, she'd seen a gun, had a gun put to her head, she thinks. She'd been threatened, "You're dead, bitch." It was that sort of line, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And she realises now she's fighting for her life.
Oh, yeah. You can see, you can imagine that a darkened area with only those security lights showing.
Yeah.
Reasonably well lit at night, but no one around.
Yeah.
So at that point, I'm pretty sure Amanda was probably convinced that she was going to die.
Amanda somehow survives these ordinary but evil places. By now it's 8 o'clock at night. Another car and another gang of young Lebanese-Australian rapists. She's taken to a lonely industrial site for the final violent and vile degradations.
The most degrading part of the whole assault, if it could get any worse, comes here, is when they hosed her down.
Literally hosed it.
Hosed her down. They grabbed a hose and they washed her down.
And then I think she's raped 2 more times after that.
Yep, that's correct.
She described where she'd been sexually assaulted so many times by so many offenders. And she got to the point, and remember, this is August, so we're talking the dead of winter here. At one stage, some of the offenders turned an industrial hose on her and washed her down. I just knew. She was telling the truth. No one makes those sorts of things up.
That was unbelievable. I mean, aside from the fact that they were abusing me, just the hosing down was sort of a sign that they didn't think anything of me.
And they laughed at that stage.
Yeah, they thought it was, the whole time they thought it was a huge joke. Huge joke.
It must have been the worst kind of nightmare. This thing
I couldn't believe it was happening. I still can't believe it happened.
High-tech police sleuthing mixed with old-fashioned police slogging. The DNA tests matched the painstaking search for suspects and witnesses. In the end, it was the rapist's mobile phone records that proved her story, a bit like fingerprints.
I commend the quality of the police investigation and the fortitude of the victim.
8 of Amanda's 14 rapists were charged and convicted. All of them are Lebanese-Australians. At last Friday, the judge sentenced the first man, Mahmoud Shami, to 18 years jail for detaining and raping Amanda. You went to school with Lebanese boys and girls?
Yes, I did. I attended many multicultural high schools and primary schools.
Were you afraid of Lebanese? Were you intimidated by
No.
Lebanese boys?
I've never been afraid of Lebanese boys.
But clearly what happened to you, there were racist overtones to what they did and said to you.
There was plenty of them. Lots. I was, quote, an Aussie pig.
An Aussie
or
pig.
something. You know, it was really a hard thing to hear because I'm proud of being Australian. I thought everyone was. And these people were making out that I was some sort of a lesser being. And It's just horrible.
Is it true that first question, almost the first question they asked you when they came on the train, was, "Are you Australian?"
Yes, it's true. They asked me what my nationality was. After I found out I had a boyfriend, they asked me what his nationality was. There was a question asked whether or not I'd slept with a Lebanese person or man before, and I hadn't, but I don't judge people by what nationalities they are.
That surprised you, didn't it?
In court, day after harrowing day, Amanda again showed why she's not just a remarkable survivor. She's also a remarkable witness. And yet there were times there when you'd only come in for 10 minutes and then you'd ask for a recess, you'd ask for a break. Why did you do that?
I couldn't cry in front of them.
You couldn't cry?
I wouldn't cry in front of them, I should say. I couldn't let them feel that they were still winning, that the whole incident was some sort of a big joke, because that's how these people treated this crime. It was like it was a joke. So for them, if I'd have cried in that courtroom, they would have thought that was even funnier. I wouldn't do it. I couldn't do that.
You figured you'd done enough crying?
Yeah.
On that night?
And especially they'd seen me cry so much that night. They'd heard me plead, and nothing moved them that night. They thought that was funny, so I didn't think anything would have changed between now and then.
So when you left the court and went back to the privacy of a room that was a courtroom allowed for you,
Yeah.
What happened?
I'd break down into tears.
With your mum?
With my mum there. Because if it wasn't for her, I'm not sure if I would have been able to deal with it between breaks, because I was just so upset.
Your mum told me that there were times there when you'd get on the floor of the other room outside the court and just get in a fetal position and just sob.
I'd start crying and rocking myself, and sort of like I did that night when I got away from him, like when I was with my friend. I just had to go to a little safe place inside, and I needed it something fierce during the trial, because it was just so difficult not break down and let it all out.
Were you embarrassed telling your mum about what happened that night?
I wasn't embarrassed. I was just so heartbroken that I was going to have to tell my mum that her daughter the child she'd given birth to had to be treated like that. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to consider. Is just telling her, "Mum, guess these 14 people have raped me." It was breaking my heart. I couldn't imagine what it would do to her.
How about your dad? You couldn't tell your dad?
My dad, he knew. I couldn't tell him myself. My mum told him that I'd been raped. I mean, my mum knew how hard it was being for me, and she said so many times, "Darling, I wish it would be me who could go up there and say it all for you, because it's just so hard for you." Makes me cry just thinking about that now.
And your dad, he was there the day that the verdict came in?
Yeah, my dad was there when the verdict came back. It was the best day. Can't even describe how awesome it was that day to get back, especially those first 15 guilties.
What did he say? What did you say to him when he suddenly heard all this terrible detail?
I think he wanted to just cry, but he didn't want to cry and upset me any more than I already was. Yeah. And that just snapped my heart, because my dad didn't know how to say it in words. Just, "I'm so sorry it happened."
Yeah. Were you worried about going to the police? I mean, did you fear that they wouldn't believe you?
I was a little bit worried about going to the police, because I felt that they would think I was stupid for getting off that train. But I didn't. I thought they would believe me.
But they also say that you're about the best witness they've ever come across.
I think they're the best police officers I've ever come across.
But how come you were so good? How come you could remember detail of the man's clothes or his hair or his nose? Or
there were little things that while they were assaulting me I would look at or remember, and I would tell myself, "You have to remember that."
Deliberately?
Deliberately, I would.
Do you feel now that because they've been convicted, about to be sentenced, do you feel they've given your life back?
I feel like some of my life's been handed back, yeah.
Do you?
I feel a lot more safer than what I did before. To know that they're all off the streets, it's good to know.
Have you won?
I feel like I have.
Good.
I certainly feel like I have. They'll be missing out on a very large chunk of their lives because they decided to do a horrific and foul thing, and they've only got themselves to blame for it now. They expected that I would keep quiet, and if I had kept quiet then they would have won, but I didn't, so I think I've won.
Hello, I'm Sarah Abo. Thanks for watching 60 Minutes Australia. Subscribe to our channel now for brand new stories and exclusive clips every week. And don't miss out on our Extra Minutes segments and full episodes of 60 Minutes on 9now.com.au and the 9Now app.